Hello everybody and welcome to the Winecast. Though I've done a grape variety recently, I'm in a bit of a time crunch and these casts are straightforward and easy to put together, so you may see a cast or two in a row about different varieties. For this cast, I wanted to focus on a grape that doesn't get as much attention as it deserves, partly because it's often, though not exclusively, found in blends, and partly because its cultivation and vinification are closely identified with only two locations. The grape, Sémillon. Sémillon is almost certainly native to the southwest of France, perhaps even to the Bordeaux region in that area, but more likely to one of the areas that neighbor that region. Like its precise place of origin, its parentage and genetic heritage are obscure too. Sémillon is easy to grow and does well in a variety of environments, so much so that it was once very widely planted, especially in the New World where at one time it was the dominant cultivar in South Africa and much of Australia, to give just two examples. Currently, as of 2010 at least, it's still the 39th most planted grape in the world, a spot that it's hovered close to over the last 2 decades. The top location for plantings of this grape is France, followed by Australia, with a little more than half as much land under vine with this grape. But even though there's less Sémillon planted in Australia than in France, the Australian industry's reliance on this grape is greater than the French industry's, with Sémillon taking up around 8% of total land under vine in Australia, as opposed to around 3% in France. Though it was once a very big deal in South Africa, Argentina, and Chile, plantings there are currently small but large enough to make those countries the next biggest growers. Turkey has just a little bit less Sémillon than Chile does, but like Australia, it accounts for a lot of land under vine there, around 9%. As a varietal, it's easy to grow. It's generally, though with one important exception, resistant to disease, and physically it has very thin skin. It's a low-acid grape and produces low-acid wines unless it's picked early. As a result of its low acidity, it often benefits from blending with higher acid grapes like Sauvignon Blanc, for example. When made as a varietal wine, it usually shows citrus and apricot notes along with a grassy, herbaceous character, and by using either riper grapes or by giving the wine time to mature, honey notes often come to the fore. Though, as I said, Sémillon has grown in a number of places throughout the world and was once very widely planted. These days, most of the vines, by a large margin, are in one of two places, so it pays to attend to them individually. The first of these is the grape's home, France. Virtually all French plantings of Sémillon are in southwest France, with most of those plantings located in either the Bordeaux region or in the neighboring department of Dordogne, where it's used to make wines in the same style as Bordeaux. Though red grapes far outnumber whites in Bordeaux, the single most planted white in the area is Sémillon, making up about 49% of white plantings. To make dry white wines in Bordeaux, it's usually blended with Sauvignon Blanc, that takes up about 43% of white vines in the area, and with a much smaller and less frequently used amount of Muscadel, that accounts for about 6% of plantings. In dry Bordeaux whites, Sémillon is usually the minor blending partner, though its use can be substantial, and it's there to add some stone fruit notes, particularly apricot, to the more pineapple and herbal-driven profile of the Sauv Blanc. Where Sémillon really stands out in Bordeaux, though, is in sweet white wines that are also usually a blend featuring the same grapes, but in which the Sémillon typically makes up 80% of what's in the bottle, with the balance taken up by Sauv Blanc and maybe a little Muscadel. Sweet wines based on Sémillon are actually produced by a number of Bordeaux appellations, but the most famous are Sauternes, Barsac, which is actually a commune of Sauternes and whose wines can opt to go by the better-known Sauternes appellation, and Séron. These wines derive their character not just from the Sémillon as such, but also from Sémillon's relationship to Botrytis, a fungus that can affect Sémillon and other grapes. Botrytis Cinerea is the name for a type of necrotrophic fungus, that is, a fungus that consumes dead tissue on its host that it helped to cause. And though wine people sometimes talk about it like it's almost magical and unique, it's really just the same fungus that afflicts ordinary fruits and vegetables and leaves them unfit for consumption. In this incarnation, it's known as gray rot, and as anyone who's ever kept fruits and vegetables for an extended period of time knows, it forms when its host is in a continuously humid environment. But under slightly different conditions, something else can happen, and it can form a condition called noble rot. This happens in environments that have a lot of humidity in the mornings that then burns off for a dry afternoon. In this environment, susceptible grapes, that tend to be the ones with the thin skins, like our friend Sémillon, can become infected with the fungus through a breach of the skin, and the humid morning weather will promote growth of the fungus while the dry afternoon weather will keep it under control. In fact, in that dry weather, the fungus will act like a wick and pull moisture from the inside of the grape into the air, drying the individual grape berries out and concentrating both their sugars and their acids, a huge benefit for a low-acid grape like Sémillon. In addition to intensifying the sugar and acid in the grape and the wine made from it, Botrytis contributes its own set of distinct flavors to the mix that include notes of honey, beeswax, and dried mushroom. Botrytis doesn't play well with all grapes, particularly red ones, but in addition to being a great partner for Sémillon, it can also positively affect the ferment grapes that Hungarian Tokai is made from, as well as Riesling. Outside of France, Sémillon is most widely cultivated in Australia, where, like I said earlier, it takes up a pretty healthy share of vineyard land, especially for a major producer like Australia that grows lots of grape varietals. Though it's made throughout the country in a relatively inexpensive, commercially driven style, where it's often blended with Chardonnay, Sauv Blanc, or both to round out its profile, one of the most appreciated expressions is from the Hunter Valley, where it's often picked early, keeping the alcohol in the finished wine low but boosting the acid. Wines made in this style are dry, famed for their complexity and for their ability to age at least a decade and often more, a process that brings out and concentrates the citrus notes as well as adds honey and toast. Outside of the Hunter Valley, the best regarded region for varietal dry Sémillon is probably the Barossa Valley, where the wines are made across a broad stylistic spectrum from rich, ripe expressions to more lean and green ones. And if you get a hankering for France down under, head to Western Australia's Margaret River, where, as in Bordeaux, it's blended with Sauvignon Blanc. There's a long, well-regarded tradition of making sweet Botrytis Sémillon in Australia as well, so be on the lookout for that. How about elsewhere? Well, it is grown in a number of regions that include, in addition to the ones already mentioned, the United States and Canada, but its production, at least as a varietal wine, in these regions tends to be on the experimental side, with distinct regional styles still emerging, or, as in South Africa, being rethought. So the best advice I've got is, if you see some from somewhere other than France or Australia, and you're feeling adventurous, give it a try and let me know in the comments, please, what you thought about it. Thanks for joining me for another Winecast. Like I said, you may see a few of these relatively brief varietal casts in the near future, but look for a greater mix of subjects on the horizon. If this cast was enjoyable or helpful to you, please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and please feel free to leave a comment, question, request, or a suggestion. I'm your host, the Unknown Winecaster, and I'm out. Enjoy the grape, but always enjoy it responsibly.